KBKW's Coffee Talk. It is 7:14. Stephen Arms is with us today. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Doug.
And we're going to do something a little special. You're going to do something special and talk about events that happened in March.
Well, I thought it'd be kind of interesting. We're coming upon the end of March here, and I was thinking it might be people might find interest in what's happened in history in March. And well, for example, in 1931, the Star Spangled Banner in March became the official national anthem of the United States.
And what year again?
1931.
1931.
People always think that was much earlier than that.
What was it, My Country 'Tis of Me before then, or did we not have
We did not have an official
okay.
that point. I personally would go for America the Beautiful.
Yeah, I think yeah.
But I mean that's that's been argued since the original time. I guess mostly because it's easier to sing.
Well, but yeah, because it's my understanding it's an English bar tune.
The original song is it's much slower too.
It's slower?
No, other way around. I'm sorry, my head just flipped. I meant to say faster, and I said slower. Sometimes I get dyslexic. But anyway, so it was a much faster tune, and then it slowed down. And of course, then the poetry comes, from Francis Scott Key. I think the other thing that was more interesting, though, that more significant to the United States and probably to the world than the national anthem would be in 1843, they invented the rubber band.
Really?
March. Yes. So you can imagine what the world would be like without rubber bands.
So, well, I was surprised that the first washing machine was back in the 1700s.
Yeah, they were electrical, obviously, but they were they were manual devices.
Yeah.
And the devices wasn't a whole lot different than I've seen that design. I mean, when I was a boy, we had an open washing machine, and it was electric. But it was an open one, and it had a ringer on the side.
Yeah, the rollers, yeah.
And they weren't any. I mean, the design really hadn't changed dramatically. Just it had a motor in it now, rather than a person flipping it around.
Because they still had the ringer that you can get your fingers caught in.
Oh yeah,
when I was a kid.
And of course, playing with it when nobody's around. I did that when I was a kid a couple of times.
Me too. I got another one for you though. It goes way back. Mm-hmm. You too, Brutus.
Oh, et tu, Brute. You're talking about the Ides of March.
The Ides of March, yeah.
Yeah, this is, people don't, what of course we're talking about is the assassination of Caesar by the Roman Senate. And again, people always, Shakespeare made it famous because Caesar beware the Ides of March. It's funny, people don't know what Ides means, though. Ides is the middle month. There's an Ides of July. Mm-hmm. There's it's just the 15th, the middle of the month. It means it's midday is what it comes originally from. Let's see, 1886 in March, Coca-Cola was invented.
Now, in fact, I read about that this morning. They did have cocaine in that at the beginning, right, and then shifted to caffeine. That's
they did.
My understanding.
From what I understand that too. I mean, they're that's more. I've never had anybody run an actual analytical analysis of it and said, "Oh, yes, we did that," but that was what the history of it seems to be. And of course, for fairness' sakes, I mean, you could buy Vladimir back then. If you had extreme pain, and it wasn't that difficult to get, and Vladimir is just opioid in alcohol.
And then my understanding, Einstein used cocaine.
There are a lot of people that did in the course of history because it wasn't wasn't
against the law.
It wasn't. No, I mean there was more of a social structure against it. I mean people thought of it as because again it was opium before, and people smoked opium, and that had a certain stigma because it tended to be related with crime and other things. So a lot of people didn't do it, but it didn't change. But it doesn't change the fact that you're right. It wasn't really illegal until modern times. And again, I've seen the effects of opioids. When I was driving an ambulance, I've seen people die of overdoses. I've seen the problems that come with it. Not something people ever should play with. I'm always very impressed with individuals who can. I think it's a testament to human character when anyone can beat opioid addiction, and I know people who have. And it's always strange.
And that's without using other drugs to prevent the brain from craving it.
Yeah, to be clean and sober. Mm-hmm. It just strikes me as being extremely. I have a friend who's been that way for like 15 years now, and with serious opioid addictions, and it's just amazing to you can get off heroin and live a normal life afterwards. I always think it's a testament. People will tell me that human beings are restricted by a lot what we are, and people like to put themselves in categories, and yet if you can overcome that, what can't you do? I mean, your life is full of so many choices. If you can do, what human beings can do if they put their mind to it. Let's see. In March 1st of 1974, We had an indictment against key members of Richard Nixon's cabinet, of course, because of the cover-up on the break-in at the Watergate, which, of course, eventually leads to Nixon's resignation. That would be, so we're talking about Ehrlich and Haldeman and John Mitchell, who had been the Attorney General. And
all because he was paranoid.
Well, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, big landslide re-election, but then all the stuff that he did prior to the re-election came out, which was the Watergate.
Yeah, Richard Nixon is a fascinating person in history because if you look at his presidency, he was a good president. But it's the social failings of his personality. Again, he didn't. And again, if they'd had the break-in at the Watergate and Nixon hadn't tried to cover it up, he'd have probably finished his term.
Yep.
I mean, because the Americans are even back then are a forgiving people. If you just said, people did this and I'm going to have it prosecuted and I'm apologizing to the American people, that'd have been the end of it.
Because I was in the Army at that time, and of course during Watergate I had just gotten out. But to me, he was my commander-in-chief, and I also thought it was kind of trumped up a little bit. No pun intended there.
No pun intended.
Yes. Okay, let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Hey, interesting array of things that you're already speaking on. I was going to call him about the opium and opioid thing, but something that you say right now that kind of alerted me, and I apologize, was that Nixon was a good president if it wasn't the scandal he was in. That's opinion, and it may be your good opinion, not arguing, but for me, he wasn't, and for a lot of Americans, he wasn't. The things he did was antithesis to the things they wanted in their United States. So that's just the caveat that I think Doug likes to throw out there. That's your opinion, John, right? So he wasn't, and just like Trump today, he's not a good president. Obama yesterday wasn't a good president. They're not, to me at least. So just my opinion. So thank you, sir.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Well, but I mean, but I'm talking about Nixon's presidency.
Yeah, he opened up China. That was
what
a
he
big
did.
deal.
Yeah, he opened up China. He handled he did in the Vietnam War. I mean, it was wrapping up, and he was the one who actually ended it. That's of great significance. He dealt with harsh economic conditions and brought it under control. I mean, as far as mechanically, his presidency was. It's like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, I think, if you look at it, if you take the personal parts out, Clinton's presidency was a good presidency. I mean, it's the last time we actually balanced the budget. There's a lot of things he did as a president in being in office. I'm separating the difference between the personal president and then Nixon and him. Or I always look at Nixon and Clinton as kind of bookends. They both had personal issues that will always stain their presidencies.
Although Nixon didn't chase women around that we know of, anyway.
Well, no, but he was paranoid.
Oh God, yes.
And because of that level of of course, if you're president of the United States, it's pretty easy to be paranoid because there are if you knew there were probably 1 million people in the world that would want to kill you, wouldn't you be a little paranoid?
Yeah.
Well, you think there's 1 million people in the world would like to kill the president of the United States?
Well, I don't. I assume so. If you were to look at it,
the whole world, there's 7 billion people.
Right.
I go, I don't know. Is that paranoia if you have that many people out to get you?
Well, we need to take a break, so we're going to do that, and then we'll be back with Stephen Arms. And your calls are welcome, of course. So once we're out of our break at 3:60. It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. 7:24 is the time. We got sunshine over the weekend. That's going to be nice, with temperatures in the low 60s to mid 60s by Sunday. But then Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to get back into kind of a wet pattern, which evidently we need because we still don't have enough moisture in the soil and out in the woods and things.
It's hard to pray for rain, though, when it's been raining so much. I understand that, too, from a point of view. But, yeah, my grandkids are coming down for the next few days, and I want it to be sunny.
Well, it should be nice the next 2 days, anyway.
Yeah, we're going to probably build a greenhouse for their granny ma.
Oh, okay.
On Saturday when they're here.
Now, is this like a kit, or you're building one from scratch?
No, it's an assembled one. I thought about trying to build it, and I looked at the materials, and I'll just buy her a kit because.
Now, is this the fiberglass one?
It's actually it's a vinyl design. It's a metal frame with a vinyl one because I want to my wife likes plants, but they don't necessarily like her, so I'm not sure. We'll see how well she does with this one. And we'll go from there. I mean, she's going to get mad at me for saying that probably.
Yeah, that's one of the dangers of doing radio.
Occasionally, I open my mouth and put my foot in it. So anyway, the it's interesting the person assessing presidents, and again, I agree with his argument about in a lot of things is that Trump is a good example. Again, we were talking about that personality-wise. I was talking to somebody last night about that, an elder gentleman, and he wishes he would shut up, but he did have to say, yeah, but there's so many things. But he did, unemployment is 50-year low. Minority employment's lowest ever. Women's is like 80-year low. I mean, there's, and we've, there is a slowdown in the world economy though that is coming, and so it is, but it doesn't, but the idea is still keep your. I mean, all in all, though, I mean, he's had a lot of good things in his presidency. Now, people, obviously, I figured we might want to talk about the Mueller report a little bit because that finally has come out, and. It's big, significant. Again, I've made my point very clear about special prosecutors. I dislike them. I think they're a horrible idea because I don't like giving that kind of. Well,
this one kind of played into Trump's hands. So
a lot of people were surprised about that, myself included, actually.
Let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Hello. I just recall that when the gentleman said that Clinton balanced the budget, I'd just like to remind him that they had a Republican Congress then, and Newt Gingrich was the speaker, and they both, I think Clinton reluctantly signed that bill to balance the budget.
It's true.
That's the only thing I'd like to say.
Well, and that is true. Newt Gingrich gets credit, but the interesting thing about that is it points out that you can be opposed to somebody. I mean, Clinton and Gingrich probably don't agree on the color of an orange, but you can actually work together for a common good, and that seems to be what is massively missing in this country right now.
That's true. That's very true. Thank you.
You bet.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. Yeah, even on the state level, there's a lot of wrangling. I don't think it's anywhere near what the federal level is, but I think this is all over the country where you have metropolitan areas kind of battling out with the rural areas over resources and taxes and things like that. But I think that's kind of all over the country.
It is all over the country. Yeah. But I can understand why people who don't live in the metropolitan areas getting angry, though, because you see cities, and I've seen this, you can take a lot of large cities, and a lot of them just are, they're going to hell in a handbasket.
Seattle's probably the biggest one right now in
the entire
nation.
I was looking at a documentary on that from
Seattle's dying?
Yeah, Seattle's dying.
That was scary in itself, I'll tell you. Hi, you're on the air.
I want to throw kind of an oddball question at you. According to historians, Napoleon left the Battle of Waterloo for like 4 or 5 hours. Have historians ever really figured out what the heck he was doing for those 4 or 5 hours?
I know what you're talking about. I've read that also. I haven't heard anyone that's ever given an answer to that question. I mean, because again, did it lead to his ultimate defeat? Is what you're talking about, and I haven't heard anyone give a definitive answer to that. It's one of those ones there's conjecture on it. And some people said he just left because he knew he was going to lose.
I was just going to ask that. He thought he was going to get his ass kicked.
And he ultimately didn't want to be captured or killed. But I've heard some other ones too. So yeah, I don't have an answer to you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Bye-bye. I also understand that he wasn't all that short.
No, he was about 5'4" or something.
See, I heard he was closer to 5'7", 5'8".
No, but remember, he was short, a little short for the time, but a man's height was about 5'6" back then.
It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. It is 7:37, and coming up on today's show in the studio now, we have Stephen Arms with us. He's a historian, and then in the 8 o'clock hour, we're going to have the How I See It commentary with Johnny Manchin, telling us how stupid we become decade after decade. He's got proof, folks. And then Dan Wood, who is a city councilman in Montesano, also works for the dairy farmers. I'm not sure the exact position, but anyway, we got a call from one of our listeners saying, well, maybe Dan could talk about milk production and how it's changed over the years. And so that will be the topic in the 9 o'clock hour. So we'll all have got milk
that's
on our...
That would be good to know. Well, with my beard, it's all white. You wouldn't notice it. But, yeah, that almost strikes me. I was watching a piece on the Senate had a vote where they voted on the Green New Deal. Did you hear about this?
I don't know which.
The Senate. Mitch McConnell called for a vote in the Senate on the Green New Deal proposal that had been put out, and it was 57-0 against.
Oh, okay.
That
includes the Democrats and everybody.
Well, it's everybody. Well, there are 52 Republicans currently, so that means five Democrats voted against it, and the rest of them all voted present. But there was no one voted in favor of it. And one of the things about it, of course, is it's heavy against cattle productions and all that. So I'm thinking about that. It definitely ties into the got milk. But I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. He's the senator from Utah. He had actually sat down and gave it all consideration it was due and put up boards of if you don't have planes in Alaska, how will people get around Alaska? And it had Luke Skywalker on a tauntaun. I mean, in Hawaii, he had Aquaman on a seahorse art, showing people that giving it all the consideration it was due. Because who's the president of Starbucks that's running for
Schultz?
Schultz, yeah. He's the one that put it in a nutshell. This whole Green New Deal nonsense it's fantasy. I mean, he wants to run for the Democratic presidency, and he called it what it was. Climate change is. People always talk about climate change, and they say, well, 97% of scientists believe in climate change. I go, I don't believe that personally. I think it's 100%. Climate changes in the world. Any scientist who doesn't know that the climate of the Earth has changed,
sure,
is an idiot.
But there is it's very speedy at this particular time for whatever reason.
But that isn't actually true. I mean, that people you need to look at it more objectively. Since 1880 to 2000, the temperature of the Earth went up apparently about 3/4 of a degree, plus or minus variables, which means it could have gone up 1.5 degrees, but it also could have gone up 1/4 of a degree. Climate shifts back and forth all over the place, and the problem that people need on this is I'm not a scientist, but I've researched on this, and is that there are about 100 factors that directly affect into the climate, and CO2 is only one of them. Water vapor, cloud formation, solar
methane,
activities.
where the cows go.
And again, there are a lot of other pollutants that we should be more concerned with. People, they say CO2 is a pollutant. Well, then I'm making pollution right now because I exhale CO2 to talk. CO2 is the essential, all carbon on this planet that has been processed by life out of CO2 out of the atmosphere. If we didn't have CO2, you wouldn't have life on Earth.
Oh, because what is it? The plants make it into oxygen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when the CO2 levels actually go up, if you have a greenhouse, for example, your CO2 is in the air. Our atmospheric CO2 right now is about 400 parts per million. And if you in a greenhouse, it can be 4,000 parts per million because the plants will grow much more rapidly at that point. In submarines, it's 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million is what is acceptable, and people can work and live under those conditions. Our primate ancestors that became us, they evolved in an atmosphere that was probably about 3,000 parts per million. I mean, you have to put it. It's a multiple issue. People say, I have one answer, and therefore I'm going to fix it. I'm going to spend trillions of dollars to resolve a problem that you don't even know what's being caused by, and if it is truly a problem.
Let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hello, Dave from Hogan's Corner.
Yeah, thank you. What really gets me, Stephen, is on the Green New Deal, is I heard, and help me verify this, that the United States is 5% of the world population. And so we're going to, in our 5%, we're going to save the entire world by stopping production of methane. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It is pretty ridiculous, and it's even worse than that because the chief polluters in the world we're not even close. It's China.
China.
Pardon? Of course. I'm sorry. Yeah, China, because they're the one, and yet so you're going. I mean, it isn't even fantasy because it would be science fiction horror because the world you'd have to live in under this would be one you couldn't. See, I always it's fascinating. People again who are talking about the Green New Deal, all the massive. You break them into climate alarmists, and then climate deniers, and then climate skeptics. Most people should be in the skeptic range because until you have definitive proof, you should always be skeptical.
Like our governor.
Yeah.
No, let him do what he's doing. He's making a fool of himself.
All right.
But
I'll let you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
But I was just thinking, one of the things, if you truly want to worry about the carbon productions and your pollutions, well, then what you need is nuclear power. And people go, oh my God! I go, you remember nuclear powers there are stage 1 reactors, stage 2 reactors. We're on stage 3 reactors right now in the designs, and the level 3s, they've been around for about 20 years. Their failure rate is 0. There has been none that have had any problems at all. We have stage 4 designs. I've been reading some stuff in scientific journals on. They are amazing. I mean, they literally are reactors that could have entire failures, and it would take it 4 or 5 days to overheat. I mean, you could literally come in there with a fire extinguisher probably in 4 or 5 days and keep it from overheating. I mean, there's some amazing technologies involved in it, and yet people are terrified of it because of ignorance, which, again, maybe will be your in the next hour on Johnny's PC, maybe talking about ignorance of human beings. If you truly are saying, I don't want carbon in the air, fine, then you need to have nuclear power.
And the thing is, the big new countries like, well, for instance, France, they're cutting back, I think, on their nuclear power. They're not restarting or building new reactors. And I think it's
hurting their energy production because of that.
And then Germany shut theirs down, I think.
They did. Germany shut theirs down. The one that has no problem with power that still uses it is Japan. And Japan's circumstance will go, well, Japan had a real bad area that went around Sendai. I have a friend who lives in Sendai, actually. But the issue on that is that, again, it was a type 2 reactor, and it needed to have backup power to keep it cool, and the tidal wave took out the fuel towers. I mean, it was a very unusual circumstance. Right. Now, granted, there should have been a backup on that, and they do have contamination. What's top of the psychology of the Japanese people, though, is that they have workers going into that area cleaning it up, and they're all done as volunteers, and the volunteers are almost all in 60s and 70s range. They specifically they've chosen as obligation because they're older, that they will go into an area they know they will get contaminated enough, and it will escalate their death. But why have a person does it as 20? And then that's a really interesting psychological difference between the devotion of people and their nation than what we would have.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they don't go in with some sort of devices.
Well, they protect themselves and everything, but some of the contamination areas are so high because of what happened in that you did have a partial meltdown, that there isn't anything that one mistake and you're getting enough contamination, it's going to lead you to have cancer or die of radiation sickness.
One of the most screwed up messes, actually, outside of Chernobyl, would be Hanford, because they've got they believe they've got radiation that will eventually end up in the Columbia River, through the not water tables, what do you call it, aquifers.
Yes. I mean, so yeah. I mean, again, Chernobyl's a whole other argument. Only the Russians could be so weird as to have a Chernobyl.
That all they were doing was testing the reactor.
Well, that's an amazing level of incompetence.
Yes.
Well, what can you say? So anyway, but I just think it's interesting that when people are I'm not a green person. I'm an ecologist. I mean, again, mine goes back to the 1970s. You should be a good steward of the earth. But I think I'm of the opinion that technology is going to eliminate most of this if you just let it. Use your nuclear power. Yeah, get ready, because you're not going to work it out with solar and wind. Okay, we'll run solar power in the United States. Let's see, California, Arizona, New Mexico will all be solar panels, and then the rest of us will have enough to have energy, because that's the way you would need it. I mean, wind power. I mean, I would believe if you could hook wind turbines into the House of Congress and propel them by people talking, you might get enough power to sustain Congress. But I don't think, other than that, it's a nice technology, but it doesn't work. And then when it does, you get the power levels you're getting. It does work. I mean, I'm not saying
right. They just have a way to store the power.
A way to store the power sufficiently, and then people always get into what's your environmental impact on it, because wind turbines, massive killing of birds. If you're solar power, massive changes that you have to put them over large areas, you change the environment. If you do tidal power, it always, the heat exchanges on that will always have issues on the growth of life, though it generally makes it better. I mean, you can find anything if you want to, if you don't want to do it, but you can't just, I'm sorry, we don't have batteries that can store hopes and dreams. and propel our. You have to have some form of energy.
I think someday they will have a way to store some of that power. I think a combination of solar, wind, and nukes would be a way to.
Well, eventually, what will happen is,
mix.
And this, I don't want to get too on this. It's high tech or ended, but fusion power is going to happen. And once you get fusion reactions instead of nuclear reactors, which are fission reactors, fusion power runs on hydrogen, and it is what the sun makes the sun go. And we're getting pretty close to figuring that out. Hopefully I'll see it before in my lifetime. And if that happens, then you have virtually limitless power at that point. That it's clean, because it's harder to keep it going than to worry about it melting down. If it shuts down, it just stops. So interesting. You look like you need to go to commercial.
Yeah. You're learning my I guess mannerisms or whatever. It is 7:48 and.
If you wish to join the quest for knowledge, the battle for truth, please hit the like button, recommend my channel to others, and of course, subscribe. Thank you kindly.